how long that dirt has been settled, how impossible return really is. No matter if this particular mystery is one day solved or not.
Around your business and see inefficiency everywhere, so you should know these numbers. 37,000, the number of businesses which have upgraded to the #1 cloud financial system, NetSuite by Oracle. 25. NetSuite just turned 25. That's 25 years of helping businesses streamline their finances and reduce costs. 1. Because your unique business deserves a customized solution, and that's NetSuite. Learn more when you download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist absolutely free at netsuite.com/NYT. That's netsuite.com/NYT.
The friendship is sharing, because I want one of your McNuggets. I need so good. There's a deal for everyone at McDonald's. Get one favorite like 10-piece chicken McNuggets, a quarter pounder, or a Big Mac. Get another for just about. Price and participation may vary. Valid for items equal or less.
Here's your money briefing for Sunday, January 21st. I'm J.R. Whalen for the Wall Street Journal. The third installment of our four-part series about planning your financial future focuses on the biggest purchase you're likely to make in your life, a home. But while picturing yourself inside a new home might be easy, the path to get there is filled with questions.
This is also a long commitment. It's why people will put off buying a home or they will rush to buy a home. Because if you're looking at fixed rates on a 30-year mortgage, that means you're going to pay that interest rate for 30 years. You can refinance, do other things to either lower it or change it, but you have to feel comfortable with it.
We'll talk to WSJ's Lorraine Lamb and Julia Carpenter, authors of the book New Rules of Money, after the break. Should you buy a house? It's an important question, but it's not the only question you should ask if you're thinking of buying your first home or moving to a new house. Lorraine Lamb and Julia Carpenter, authors of New Rules of Money, join me. Welcome back, guys.
Great to be here. Thanks for having us.
It seems like every week we get new stats about the housing market. New home prices, existing home prices, mortgage rates. Give us a quick snapshot of what the housing market looks like right now.
We are in a period of time where there is very low housing inventory. And if you talk to any house hunter, they already know this. There's a dearth of starter homes for first-time home buyers, and that puts them at a real disadvantage when they're trying to find something that is affordable, but also the right size for them.
Affordability, it has really been like the word that people have really focused on the last couple years. We had a period of low interest rates, which made housing theoretically more affordable, but during that time, because of the low inventory and the high competition, prices were actually driven up quite a bit. So even if you have a low interest rate and you can borrow money for cheaply, you were still paying like a big sticker price for these homes. And now, we're in a period of higher interest rates. People are expecting the Federal Reserve to cut rates in the coming year, though we don't know when. When rates move down, housing prices tend to move up. It also frees up inventory, but when rates go up, there's maybe more to pick from, and sellers who are more willing to negotiate with you.
So let's talk about the first steps that people should take who want to buy a house. There are lots of apps with pages of listings, but when people see the price, what questions should they be asking themselves?
A lot of people see a price and they think either, wow, that is way too much money, that's
appreciate choosing McDonald's. Are you using my board back today?
I actually have a mobile order.
You actually have a mobile order?
Yep,
And is that for Russell?
correct.
Alrighty, go ahead and go around, hon.
Thanks.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you. train's moving.
Pretty easy, consistent, and I strain it to make it a little thicker. A couple times I couldn't get access to this local milk, and so I'd go to a grocery store and just buy a name brand, and it just didn't work. It would be like kind of milk-like consistency, so pretty thin, but it never set. And so I just started wondering what's the difference. The only thing I could point to was this local milk was pasteurized, and the store brand was highly or ultra pasteurized.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering if that was the issue.
Well, they should take all the ultra pasteurized milk and throw it out. I mean, it's just awful. Years ago, milk killed people, right? Because you can go back.
Sure.
There's a reason for it, and it's a health reason, and it'll keep a long time. Besides the flavor problem, I have heard that ultra pasteurized milk in particular is problematic. You know, it's all about the proteins in the milk getting denatured. It's sort of like, you know, a tangle or a nest of dried pasta, right? And then you cook it, and it all untangles, and then it can reconnect, right? The casings denature, they relax, and they reconnect to form a structure, which makes something thick, like a custard or yogurt. Also, we're using whole milk, I would assume, when you bought it at the supermarket.
Yeah.
Yeah. My guess is the fat content of the milk you're buying from the farm probably is even better. But it's something about heat and casein and protein, and something's going on there, so it's hard for it to come back together to create that essentially gel. Sarah?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, ultra pasteurized milk is heated to a really high temperature for only a couple of seconds, but it's like 280.
280.
Yeah. And so that really changes its nature. Also gives it sort of a cooked cheese taste. I've had problems also with ultra pasteurized cream and trying to whip it and having it go to butter before it ever becomes cream. So I think we agree with you that you've isolated the culprit. It's the ultra pasteurized milk, so you got to just avoid that.
You know, I grew up on raw milk. It has a taste. And if you buy even pasteurized milk, there's not much flavor in it either. And my guess is I wouldn't make yogurt unless I could get really good milk, right? What's
Yeah.
the point?
Yeah, I agree.
So I'm with you.
Yeah.
I guess I'm lucky that I got this pasteurized milk. If I would have failed the experiment the first few times, I probably would have given up and not making yogurt.
Right. I mean, real yogurt is phenomenal.
Thanks, Steve.
Take care.
Thank you for taking calls on the show. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
This is Mill Street Radio. If you're having trouble in the kitchen, Sarah and I are here to help. Please ring us anytime, 855-426-9843. That's 855-426-9843. Or just email us at questions@millstreetradio.com. Welcome to Milk Street. Who's calling?
Hi, this is Carrie from Virginia.
How are you?
Good, how about you all?
Pretty good. How can we help you?
I have a question about aprons and how long with heavy use they should typically last.
I am here. I'm Carrie's husband, Daniel, and I am the primary cook in the family, and I am the one who is pretty quickly destroying every apron that we get. So we're trying to settle just how long these aprons should be lasting. I think I've gone through about 4 in the past 5 years. So we're just kind of trying to settle a debate about if that's unreasonable or not.
Well, I mean, the first question is, what kind of apron are you buying? If they're made out of flour sacks, I guess they wouldn't last. But, I mean, there are two kinds that will last essentially forever, like a wax cotton, right? The kinds of things you buy, like a British hunting jacket or something. I have one like that, and I don't think you can destroy that no matter what you like. And the other is a leather. There's a place that makes leather aprons, and that's not going to fall apart. If not, then just get a really, really super heavy, almost canvas style fabric. Let me just ask, when you cook, what are you doing to destroy these aprons?
I work from home and love to cook, and I'll say that I am in these aprons, several, maybe 2 hours a day on average. I've had a variety of aprons. I've had a few durable Chef's Works ones. I think I had one of the Milk Street KAF ones, which was my favorite, but all of them sort of eventually got holes in the front of them. I mean, I don't know, how often are you washing them, Carrie?
Probably not as often as I should, but I think maybe every couple of weeks. They just go through on their own or with rags, not bleaching or anything.
You could look at it differently. The other point of view is you're basically saying, an apron lasts a year, right? You've gone through 4 aprons in a few years, something like that.
Yeah.
That's not so bad. If you're expecting it to last 5 years, maybe it's your expectations.
Yeah.
The issue here is not the apron.
Yeah, no, let me ask a question.
Yeah.
Your husband does all the cooking or most of the cooking?
Most of the cooking, but with a capital S. And he does the dishes too. I acknowledge I'm very
Jeez.
spoiled.
5 an apron every birthday.
Well, and I'll say this, Carrie's about to have our 4th child, so she puts in
Oh.
more than enough work around.
I should say so.
I'm happy to keep going through these aprons too.
Yeah,
Okay.
you got off easy.
You did, actually. Now I'm switching gears here, yeah.
It's more a debate we were having about how often, with the typical use, one does go through them. I was wondering if the aprons that you all use in your recipe development that are getting used all day, every day, or if those got...
They get trashed. We end up with dozens and dozens of them. For 2 hours a day, to use 1 apron for a whole year is great.
Perfectly fine. Perfectly fine.
All right, guys.
Okay.
Enjoy.
Thanks for calling.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
You're listening to Milk Street Radio. Coming up, the story of the world's first supermarket and much more. That's in just a moment.
Support comes from Dr. Fred Peck, Fellow of the American Academy of Cosmetic Dentistry, focused on offering state-of-the-art cosmetic and restorative dentistry in the Montgomery Dental Office. Dr. Peck's goal is a beautiful, healthy smile that will improve your self-image and confidence. You can make an appointment or discover more at peckdds.com.
Hey, it's Layla Falden. What you do in the morning helps set the tone for the rest of your day. Meditating can ease you in, keep you grounded and calm. Journaling may give you a sense of intention and purpose. And working out could add a boost of energy. If you want to feel balanced, informed, and connected to the world around you, here's another morning ritual for you. Listening to Morning Edition from NPR News. Every weekday, no yoga mats or weights required.
On 91.7 WVXU.
91.7 WVXU Cincinnati, 88.5 WNUD Oxford.
This is Milk Street Radio. I'm your host, Christopher Kimball. My next guest is Benjamin Moore. He's the author of The Secret Life of Groceries, The Dark Miracle of the American Supermarket. Benjamin, welcome to Milk Street.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Grocery stores, supermarkets, you have some terrible things to say about them. You have some really interesting things to say about them. So let's go back early on to the early 19th century. You make the case that cardboard, and corrugated cardboard in particular, had a lot to do with the growth or the invention of the supermarket.
Yeah. I mean, the revolution in packaged goods that happens in the mid-19th century really changes everything. And you don't really think of cardboard boxes being the stuff of revolutions, but this is like, we're talking invention of the wheel type stuff for the gateway to modern society here. Suddenly you have a way of making small, individuated products. And prior to that, grocery stores existed in bulk. It was all giant barrels of dried fruit that the grocer would chisel out from behind his counter. And then along comes the individual container, and it really shifts how consumers interact with goods. And this is not just cardboard. There's innovations in canning, in glass, and when you have individual products, they need a name on them. They need some type of identity. And that really gives birth to the brand and gives birth to the idea of a consumer who goes in looking for a particular item. You're not looking for crackers, you're looking for Utz. You're looking for Nabisco.
And you point out, this is amazing, in 1900, Nabisco is selling more than 100 million boxes of Unita biscuits a year.
Yeah, and Unita biscuit comes from this possibly apocryphal story where Robert Gare from Brooklyn invents the first automated cardboard box distribution center, and Nabisco comes to him with these biscuit products and he goes, you need a name for these biscuits. And they don't think that this is an important thing, so they just slap the name Unita onto the box, and it goes on to be what you just said, this humongous blockbuster product. So, because people could suddenly ask for something by name instead of just getting biscuits.
It's interesting, though, if you look at studies, time and time again, they tell us that we think we want choice, but some of the happiest people in the world are the people with the least amount of choice.
Oh, 100%.
And like if you came from Russia, mid-century or even back in the 80s or 90s, and you show up at a supermarket, like Khrushchev did at one time, and the 30,000 or 40,000 SKUs would be confusing.
Oh, 100%. Look, I think you hit the nail on the head with the disorientation that this world produces. When people walked in the first, generally recognized first supermarket, this is 1930 in Queens, a gentleman named Michael Cullen opens this thing up. It's only 6,000 square feet. It's tiny. Like right now you have 100,000 square foot superstores. This 6,000 square foot. When people first walked in, they complained about being dizzy from the options. Housewives would turn to their husbands and say, "I'm gonna faint." These are from press reports. There was a sense of overwhelm. In 1956, when the first American-style supermarket opens overseas in Rome, this is, again, straight from press reports, people were shrieking with delight. A woman started running up and down the aisle screaming, "This must be heaven." And, the Pope, a few days later, makes an announcement from the Holy See on this, miraculous thing. So disorientation and overwhelm are exactly, one, what the store constructors were going for, but two, what was created.
So you present two sides of the supermarket. I guess the argument here is, on one hand, the supermarket, American supermarket, is an amazing concept with anywhere from 10,000 to 50 or 60,000 SKUs. You get relatively fresh food. You're not probably getting poisoned too often. It's an amazing thing. On the other hand, there is a real dark side. So let's start with the dark side.
Well, the dark side of this supermarket is that it really reveals a lot of our, what I would call preferences, right? People are constantly choosing based on price. They're making choices on convenience and quality, high quality. They want high quality, low price, and extremely convenient. And if you notice, those three things don't quite mesh. They don't go together. You don't get all three at once. Sorry. And when you start demanding all three at once, it cascades through the system. And it gets taken out in ways that I think we all don't like to look at or think about, but it gets taken out of the environment and it gets taken out of labor.
Well, you talk about this individual in the Thai shrimp industry, Ton Lin, right? The quote is, he's led to a room with 25 others. The door is open, he's locked in. It is only now, looking around at the 25 other men in the room, that Ton Lin realizes something is wrong. And that something was pretty horrific, right?
Yeah. Ton Lin is a trafficked migrant who essentially gets sold onto a boat. He becomes, there's really no other word in the English language to use but slave labor. He is beaten to work. He's not paid. He watches men around him who his friends get killed and kicked off the boat. He's imprisoned. It's not an exchange like indentured servitude where if he works long enough he'll get off. He's just kind of captured and forced to work, and it's pretty hard to reconcile this stuff is happening and that it's connected to the supply chain. And I think what's really interesting is it's connected to the supply chain in a way that nobody wants but nobody can get rid of. And that's kind of a profound point.
So let me ask this question. We all know the retail supermarket business is a very low margin business, 1% to 2%.
Yes.
So this is a cycle where you have to buy cheap in order to maintain even a tiny little margin to make a profit. That seems to be the cycle here, right? So how does that get solved?
Is there? Do you know if there's like what do you think about that?
Yeah, most definitely. So this package of sticky rice and beans and pork, it's boiled for like hours in a giant pot, and it's a communal thing. Like you have to boil it for, if you've got like medium-sized ones, it's about 5 inches square, it boils for 5 to 6 hours.
Oh wow!
And yeah. So it's like this long-term investment of time and a lot of communal cooking. But the crunchy contrast comes in the forms of like pickled vegetables and preserved vegetables. This time of the year, if you are in like northern Vietnam, you really don't get a lot of the fresh herbs. There are some, but it's not that kind of plethora of hedgerow greenery that people expect from Vietnamese food. And so the crunch and the contrast are there, but it's not the usual suspects that people would associate with Vietnamese food.
Okay, that's interesting. And do you have like a family recipe for your bun chon? Like, is it like it's got to taste like mom's, or does it count?
Mom's tastes like something she brought over in 1975, and her recipe goes back to a friend of the family's who actually wrote an article in Saigon about how to make bánh chưng. And when he came to America, he was like, I'm going to bring some of my most valuable things. I'm going to bring like a photocopy or a mimeograph or whatever it was of that particular article. And he sent it to her, and that's how she was able to replicate the intricacies of wrapping the cake, because it's not really made of like many ingredients, but in order to take those ingredients and assemble it into basically like a gift box of food that's wrapped in banana leaf is pretty difficult. And so she does that. She taught me how to do it.
How do you do that? How do you make like, soft food appear like
exactly? Right. So there is a mold, a wood mold, in a square-shaped frame, and then
I line it with leaves, banana leaves and bamboo leaves in a particular pattern, and then I put my ingredients in and I fold the leaves down, but then there's a certain point where I have to remove it from the mold, and that's the tricky part. And I literally will somehow slide that mold onto my forearm and then do like a little Cirque du Soleil trick to remove the mold and then wrap it all up. But aluminum foil helps a lot.
You know, the ingenuity of humankind is using tools. So there you go.
Exactly, and we didn't have aluminum foil in Vietnam in the 1970s, and so people would just kind of freestyle it with a particular kind of leaf. They wouldn't use banana leaf, and but everyone would just say, well, how beautiful can your bánh be? But in America, you can make it beautiful with like the wooden mold as help, as well as the foil.
Who's in charge of making in your family?
Typically, well, I split duties with my mom, but she, you know, it depends on her mood. And last year, right before Tet, my father had passed away, and so I didn't want my mom to be lonely on Tet, so I drove down to Southern California from my home, which is about an 8-hour drive. And I said, Mom, I said, ma'am, you know, let's make bánh. And she was like, I don't know, I'm kind of out of practice, I don't know, I don't feel so good. And then all of a sudden she calls me a week before and she says, I told your sister to get me all the ingredients and the leaves. And I was like, all right, she's still got her game on. Yeah. And so I go down there and she's just like, you know, we're gonna make it. And 2 days before, she goes into high gear to like soak the rice, to cook her mung beans, to prep the leaves, and then the day before she and I wrap them together. And she doesn't just wrap like 2 or 3, she made about 20. And she had 3 pots going, and she like climbs, she's 88, she climbs up into her garage and like pulls down these gigantic stock pots that she and my dad used to use to make bánh. And I'm just like, you're gonna fall, woman. She's like, no, I'm not. And I'm like trying to help her. And it was, you know, and it was a great, wonderful distraction and a wonderful way for us to celebrate the new year, something new without my father. And I think that's the other aspect of Tet, is that it's very family oriented, and there's a lot of nostalgia, and there's a lot of this notion of gratitude. And that's what I always want to tell people about Tet, is that it's for us, for Vietnamese people, it's a very humble kind of time of the year.
We'll be back with more with Andrea Nguyen, author of Vietnamese Food Any Day. I'm Francis Lamb, and this is The Splendid Table from APM.
WVHU will bring you live NPR coverage of Tuesday night's New Hampshire primary beginning at 7 p.m. on air, online at WVHU, on our app found in your app store, or by asking your smart speakers to play WVHU. I'm Tony Ray. Thank you all for listening.
We at WVXU are saddened to learn of the passing of longtime volunteer and good friend Beverly Kinney. Beverly gave of her time weekly and personally wrote to over 1,500 listeners, thanking them for their support of the station. Today we send our deepest sympathy to Beverly's husband Ed and their family, and we remember her with more of the programming she counted on. Music lovers, Radio Artifact is Cincinnati's home for local music and is now available through your Amazon Echo. Enable the Radio Artifact skill and ask Alexa to open Radio Artifact. Support comes from Bethany Seminary in Richmond, Indiana, introducing Bethany Bold for exceptional students to address real-world issues like poverty and racial justice through service work while earning a graduate degree. Learn more about receiving housing, full tuition scholarships, and a monthly stipend at bethanyseminary.edu/BOLD.
The Splendid Table is supported by BetterHelp, committed to supporting mental health through therapy. Clients are matched with one of 25,000 therapists and can communicate via video, chat, or phone at betterhelp.com/public. And by Progressive. Progressive Commercial Insurance protects small businesses from retailers to tradespeople. Progressive covers a variety of business needs with a range of coverages. More at progressivecommercial.com. I'm Francis Lamb, and this is the show for curious cooks and eaters. We're talking today about Lunar New Year menus from China, Korea, and now Vietnam. with cookbook author Andrea Wynn. Let's get back to it with her. So we've talked a lot about the banjong as sort of the centerpiece of the meal, and how eating is such an important part of celebrating Tet, as you said. Do you feel like you also, do you evolve the menu? Do you feel like you don't dare evolve the menu? Do you add things along with the banjong? Like, what do you...
Right, I mean, isn't there always that fear, Francis, is like when you stray from tradition that something or someone's going to strike you down?
Sure. Like some lightning bolt.
Right. And for me, as a writer, people always coming to me and asking, what do you traditionally do? And I'm just like, well, these are the traditions of my family, and these are Vietnamese foodways, but foodways evolve. And so one of the things that really kind of gets me about Tet and my family's celebration is that it's very, very meaty. And it's the time of the year when you're supposed to traditionally kill a pig and make, different kinds of charcuterie, and also simmer parts in caramel sauce. And so we always make these pork riblets in caramel sauce and fish sauce. It's like a bittersweet, savory kind of dish. But this year, I'm going to do a vegetarian take on a southern Vietnamese cob. And so the Southerners will cook pork belly up with coconut water, caramel sauce, and eggs. And they serve that with their Tet celebration. And because my family's like half northern and half southern, I'm like, I'm gonna go all regions, okay? I'm just gonna go all the way from the top to the bottom of the country. But the version I'm making is going to involve frying tofu and then simmering it with coconut milk and fish sauce, and having the eggs in there with the caramel sauce, and it's absolutely delicious. And the tofu gets like this richness that is very similar to the pork belly, except you don't have to eat pork yet again. Because I mean, I love pork, but it gets to be very, very heavy duty.
Yeah. Well, I love that you also feel the, obviously you have the pull of tradition, you have the pull of wrapping and doing this craft with your mother, but also that you feel the freedom to say, hey, I'm going to switch things up for my own taste too.
Making that switch as a cook is something that when I was younger, I wouldn't have done because I felt like I didn't have the right to. But as I've become, a more well-practiced cook, a person who feels, more confident in the kitchen and in my culture and in terms of who I am, I take more liberties with it. I mean, and without straying too far from what makes Vietnamese food what Vietnamese food is. And the recipe that I talked to you with the pork and eggs in caramel sauce is something that I came up with for my upcoming cookbook, Evergreen Vietnamese. And that's all rooted in Vietnamese traditions of using a lot of ingredients from the earth with just a little bit from the sea and some meat. And I remember like sharing this idea with my mom. I was like, that pork belly, caw recipe, well, I'm gonna make it with tofu. And at first, because she's such a traditionalist, she was like, what are you doing? That sounds so wrong. And I was like, lady, it's all right. And I served it to her, and she was like, oh, this is like really good. So even for someone of her generation, born in like the 1930s, she's willing to be flexible. And it's just a matter of opening yourself up to new ideas, but in a way also tracing those back to really where your food traditions come from. And I think that is a time when I'm always thinking about that, going back and then moving forward.
I love that. That's super, super lovely. Well, thank you so much, Andrea. It's been such a pleasure talking with you.
Always a pleasure talking with you, Francis.
Andrea Wynn's latest book is called Vietnamese Food Any Day, and her next one, all about the great plant-based dishes of Vietnam, is Evergreen Vietnamese. And on our website, splendidtable.org, you can find one of her classic recipes for pork ribs and caramel sauce. It is a really, really great time for Korean food lovers in New York City right now. There has just been this incredible bumper crop of exciting, creative Korean restaurants all over the city. One of New York's absolute greatest Korean chefs isn't really looking to innovate anything. Hoon Kim keeps it old school. So old school, in fact, that he has been spending the last 12 years traveling back and forth to Korea, learning how to make the traditional seasonings like soy sauce and fermented soybean paste that are the backbone of Korean cuisine. And so we figured anyone that interested in tradition would probably take the Lunar New Year pretty seriously. Hey, Chef, it's great to see you.
Hi, Francis. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk with you about this, because I actually don't know much about what a traditional Korean Lunar New Year celebration is like. And when we talked earlier, you said you do actually celebrate it in a very traditional way.
Yes.
Do you remember how you first started learning about these traditions?
I was born in Korea, and I was there until I was 4. I lived in England and then here to the U.S. My first memory of celebrating these Lunar New Year customs is when I was about 5 or 6. It's the first time that I sort of realized I didn't have a father, because my father passed away when I was 2. And New Year's, a lot of my relatives, we would get together at my house and sort of have this. For me, it was festive. You know, the ladies, the women cooked all day in the kitchen from scratch, and at night we had this huge table with an enormous amount of food, fruits, candies even, and we would all sort of take turns bowing, and then afterwards we would just eat, pig out all night, and everybody would go home with food that was left over. And I found out later the reason why we were there was to sort of remember my father who passed away, and this act or this ceremony is called Chesa, and we do it twice a year. Once Lunar New Year, and once the day that he actually did pass away, which is early December. And you know, I never really grew up in Korea, but the more I visited Korea, I realized it's not just me, it's a lot of people, Christians, Buddhists, and all religions. It's more of a tradition, cultural rather than sort of religion Buddhist based.
Oh, but some of the particulars of how you celebrate are rooted in the religious.
Yes. And when I was living in England or in New York, my mother was too busy to cook, and we didn't have relatives in the country, so we would actually celebrate or do the Chesa at a Buddhist temple.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and you know, we are Christian. We go to church every Sunday, but twice a year we went to the Buddhist temple to remember my father. What I remember, you know, when I got to be a certain age, I started to question the monks who would perform this Chesa with me. Like, why are we doing this? I'm Christian, you know, what's this for? And I think I was 12, and that explanation that I heard when I was 12 is the reason why I keep doing it, and the reason why I will do it for the rest of my life. The monks explained that when we die and we become spirits, we're just like we're alive. We're very social. So all the spirits hanging out together. There's a group of friends, and they like to have parties, and their parties are thrown by us who are still living. So these Chesas are for them a bragging right. You know, it is their party night because they go around to all of their friends' Chesas, and they eat. And they have a good time because everybody's remembering them, bowing to them, pouring them liquor at Chesa. And, you know, if you don't have Chesa for your ancestors, then they are embarrassed, you know, because people, you know, it sort of shows that you haven't lived a good life where people on earth don't
trying to remember you.
Yeah.
To remember you.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
So, you know, I had never known my father. But he gifted me my life, and I'm a very happy person. So to show that appreciation, I would always try, or I have done a Chesa for 48 years now, 47 years, yeah.
Wow. And so what's on the menu for this feast?
It's gotten now where every family or every region has like sort of different rules. what I do is I veer a little bit away from the Buddhist diet. So when I was doing this at the temple with the monks, they would never use any spices. They wouldn't use garlic, onion, the aromatics, because they said that these strong, pungent aromas would scare the spirits away. Well, I learned from my relatives that my father loved spices and loved meat and loved fish. So I just thought, why not cook food that he would like? Even if it would scare some of the spirits away, which, I don't believe too much, but I
truly a chef.
And I told my son the other day, he's only 13, and he's like at that point where he's questioning why we do this. I told him, look, you don't have to cook, but go to a steakhouse, leave an empty table for me, and order me a nice porterhouse, medium rare. And that would be, because that's how I would like to remember. Traditionally, we always have chuns, which are sort of savory pancakes, little fillets of fish, zucchini, tofu, and then we definitely have namus, which are vegetables. Like if you know bibimbap, it's the vegetables inside. So spinach, watercress, what else?
Which now you mentioned, they're not very heavily seasoned, right?
Yeah, they're not very heavily seasoned, but they always have garlic.
Yeah.
All the Korean namus have garlic and bean sprouts, mung bean sprouts, and I sort of make it delicious because we have to eat it afterwards. So I season it to the point where it's yummy, and those are the traditional ones.
Are they like blanched?
Yes, they're blanched, and then they're dressed with salt, soy sauce, garlic, or sesame oil, sesame seeds, etc. Sometimes you add gochugaru, which is the red pepper flakes, which I do because it tastes better. And then a lot of seasonal fruits. These days it would be persimmons, very colorful fruits as well, oranges, and then candy. Candy, I actually can't get here, but traditionally in Korea they have candies that are specifically made for Jesa. Very colorful, Buddhist colors, a lot of like prime, green, blues, reds. It just makes the table look a lot more festive. And then always a soup, always a clear soup, and a large bowl of rice, and alcohol. Sometimes I do soju, sometimes I do makgeolli.
So soju is like a clear spirit, right? Almost like a...
Yes.
But makgeolli is like a cloudy, fermented rice.
Yeah, it's brewed like a beer almost.
Okay.
And I guess you can sort of say it's almost like a nigori sake / beer.
Okay.
Alcohol content's only 6%. It's on the sweeter side because it is a lot of sugars from the rice, and it's traditionally a farmer's drink. Farmers, middle of the day when it was too hot, they would drink makgeolli, take a little hour nap, and then they would go back to work. It's actually not filtered. It's actually the scraps from the actually filtered part from the more expensive Korean spirits and alcohol. So from what the rich people would drink, the rice wine would be clear, and then the scraps left over would go to the farmers. These days, though, it's really hip in Korea. All the young people are sort of into it, and I like it. So I don't know if my dad liked it, but I'm sure he would.
He'll want to knock one back with
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Can we go a little bit into the juns you make? Because I love these. I've never been to a Korean New Year celebration, but I see them in Korean restaurants. Like sometimes seafood pancake, or kimchi pancake.
Okay, so that is a chun as well, but that's more like a composed chun, where it's large and round. The Jesa chun's a little bit different. You make a chun individually. So it's flour, egg batter, and then pan fry. And we do that with like little slices of like coins of zucchini. We do it with little fillets of fish. So we fillet a fish and cut it down to like sort of bite-sized knobs, and then we season it, flour it, egg batter it, and fry it. So it's a lot of work. It really
so like
is a
individual
lot of work. Individually. Yes,
pan-fried
yeah.
fritters.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, Jason food, and I've experienced this. I don't know if it's the best tasting Korean food, but it is the most labor intensive. It is the most sort of, the toughest to resource because traditionally, because you can't season it too much, the ingredient itself has to be fresh. It has to be really good because that is what you're showcasing. So a lot of this takes in Korean word 정성, which is care and dedication and devotion, all of that.
I guess putting it all together, if I was a Korean, and I know there's probably people now, but like, what are some ingredients that I would be looking for right now that are standout ingredients in the winter?
Cabbage, John, napa cabbage, because this is kimchi baking season. Kimjang season.
Okay.
Right now is when cabbage is the sweetest. Sweet potatoes. And definitely fish. Like right now it's at its fattiest. And the namus, it would be dried. Spring, summer, great vegetables. Koreans dry it and then they hydrate it and make the namus in the winter. And that tradition still exists. So you would be going to the markets and knowing during the summer which stalls have the freshest and the nicest vegetables. In the winter, they would be selling the same vegetables that are now dried. So that's what you would get. And if for those who might not know what namu is, if you go to a Korean barbecue restaurant or any Korean restaurant, they start you out with these little side dishes, these banchans. And most times they will have several namus as one of the banchans because they are cheaper to make, and you can sort of make a whole bunch at the same time, and it stays, fresh in your fridge for a couple of days. And in Korea and here, it's for every Korean family. We always have namu in the fridge, and it's also a staple for chesa.
Yeah. And I know you just opened a banchan deli. I can't wait to come visit you there and actually grab a bunch of these namus and bring them home and have a big bowl of rice.
I make them every day, every morning.
Well, Chef, it has been great talking with you. Thanks so much. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year
Happy
to you
Chesa.
too. Thank you.
Only Kim's restaurants in New York City are Danji, The Little Banchan Shop, and Meiju. His cookbook is called My Korea. You can find his recipe for simple jung, those fritters he was talking about, at splendidtable.org. And that is our show today. To all of you who celebrate, Happy Lunar New Year. Talk to you next week. The Splendid Table is supported by Progressive Insurance, providing direct car insurance rates side by side with other insurance carriers. Customers can see rates and find an option that works for their needs. Now that's Progressive. Learn more at progressive.com. Our show is made every week by technical producer Jennifer Lukey, producer Erica Romero, and managing producer Sally Swift. James Napoli is our digital producer. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Francis Lamb, and this is APM, American Public Media.
Coming up tomorrow on Cincinnati Edition, a Kentucky Republican lawmaker has proposed a bill to address some of the state's housing shortages. He'll discuss with Lucy May and you on Cincinnati Edition at noon and 8 o'clock here on WVXU. I'm Tony Ray, and up next, Travel with Rick Steves.
Our teenagers are growing up in a complex, complicated world. WVXU's Democracy and Me project helps students better understand government, reliable sources of news, and the importance of an engaged citizen. Information at democracyandme.org, supported by the Charles H. Dater Foundation.
91.7 WVXU Cincinnati and 88.5 WMUP Oxford. News from Cincinnati Public Radio and NPR.
Hola, habla español? Today on Travel with Rick Steves, Julie Barlow and Jean-Benoit Nadeau explain how the Spanish language rose to global prominence, starting with King Ferdinand.
This is a king who set out to make Spanish into something worthwhile to use.
The authors of The Story of Spanish help us see the influence of Spain on who we are today in North America.
The entire cowboy culture in the United States was actually created in Spain, in Spanish, by Mexicans.
We'll also get advice for enjoying Spain on a first-time visit. A flamenco show is a good place to grasp the influences of Spanish history.
It's a mixture, a melting pot of all of this culture. So the flamenco, it's
and these are given out without really much choice for locals, because if you want to open a bank account, run a business, get welfare payments, do almost anything really in relation to the state, then you need a Russian passport.
As best as you can tell, and again, talking about a lot of people here, so there's probably not one clear direction or another, but how is this being received by people who live in this parts of Ukraine? Is it just a feeling of, we're here, we're occupied, we have to go along? Are there any sort of signs of pushback in any sort of way that you can follow?
Well, of course, that's where the violence comes in. Any kind of pushback is met with extreme repression by the Russian authorities. Bearing in mind that a lot of people have left, so those who are perhaps most likely to be activists, most likely to be opposed to the Russian rule in some kind of very active way, many of those have fled these territories, particularly younger people, professionals. But then for most people it's just a case of survival. I think there's not any great sort of upsurge of pro-Russian feeling, certainly, but people have very little choice. Not everybody can leave, and therefore they're trying to simply get by and survive and hope that they see better days.
So you have a lot of detail about the bureaucratic ways that Russia is establishing itself here. What about the education system? I thought there were a lot of interesting examples of that.
So again, Russia's intent really on sort of re-socializing young people. Most schools in the region have gone over to Ukrainian language education. This is part of the country where quite a lot of people still speak Russian at home, But more and more young people have become really Ukrainian speakers over the last few years. Russia's put a stop to all that. All schools are now back on Russian language education, and they're all really teaching according to the Russian curriculum, which is particularly sort of narrow curriculum, including a new Russian history textbook, for example, which describes the Ukrainian state as a state run by neo-Nazis. All the kind of falsehoods and propaganda that you get from the Russian state are now being taught in these Ukrainian schools. So this is a huge change in education for young people, but it is a long-term strategy for Russia to re-educate the youth, to try and force them to adopt Russian cultural, political and social views over time. And we've seen them be relatively successful at doing that in other areas, such as in the Donbass and indeed in Crimea as well. So they have quite a lot of experience in this.
And you note that there's even a heavy hand in pop culture and arts in terms of what is allowed to be performed at live theaters, the movie theaters, what films they're playing. What is the larger strategy here? Is it to be able to make an argument that the people who live here feel Russian, or is it to change opinions over time so that if there were ever negotiation over the fate of these areas, Russia could say, look, these people are part of our country? Like what is the thinking of the goal 4 or 5 years down the line?
I mean, essentially the Russian view is that they don't accept that these people really are Ukrainians. They claim that they are effectively Russians who've been at various stages sort of brainwashed into speaking or claiming to have Ukrainian identity. So Russians are trying to put the clock back, really, and change people's identities through these cultural, educational instruments. Culture is a very important one, and above all, it means imposing the Russian language. Ukrainian is really sort of expelled from the public sphere, and Russia's been very active at pulling down all sorts of Ukrainian symbols, anything that really links the region to Ukraine or reminds people they might be part of Ukraine has been destroyed by the Russians in a very rapid and very brutal way.
And all of this, of course, is happening in a moment when Ukraine is rightly worried about military aid drying up from the United States, from Western Europe. There's an increasingly hostile climate to more aid for Ukraine in Congress. I mean, here's the House Speaker, Republican Mike Johnson, the other day at the White House after a meeting with President Biden about this.
We understand that there's concern about the safety, security, sovereignty of Ukraine, but the American people have those same concerns about our own domestic sovereignty and our safety and our security.
How concerned are officials in Ukraine about, given the stalemate of the war, the possible drying up of funds, and all of this bureaucratic work to entrench these regions in Russia? How much of a real concern is it that these parts of Ukraine are just lost for good at this point?
Well, it is a genuine concern. I mean, Ukrainian officials really hoped, of course, that there would be a successful counteroffensive during 2023 that would really retake a large part of these lands, if not all of it, then certainly those that have been occupied since February 2022. But that has, of course, stalled at the front line. It's clearly quite difficult for the Ukrainians to break through the Russian front lines. So the longer this dispute over aid goes on, the more concern there will be in Kiev about the extent to which they really have a realistic prospect of regaining these territories in the short term.
That's David Lewis, professor at the University of Exeter. His piece, The Quiet Transformation of Occupied Ukraine, is out now in Foreign Affairs magazine. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
California's governor shot down an attempt to put an age restriction on tackle football. Supporters say the less exposure that children have to tackle football, the better. Hits that come from playing could lead to risks developing CTE, a degenerative disease caused by repeated head impacts. It's been found in the brains of hundreds of former football players, including those who stopped playing after high school. But even in a mostly blue state like California, limiting tackle football for kids may be off limits for politicians. Cap Radio's Kate Wolf brings us this report.
It's January, and tackle football season for kids here in Sacramento ended a few months ago. In the off-season, some of the kids from the team are trying out 7-on-7, a version of touch football with no tackling. 12-year-old Kainoa Navarrete hasn't played before.
I played flag football, something like it, but this is fun.
Navarrete's been playing tackle football since he was 6. He says tackle is an outlet for his feelings, but he takes the hits too.
I do get worried a lot.
When was the last time you were worried about your head?
Probably like a month ago, like in games, because sometimes I get hit in the head a lot, and it kind of stings, like a headache.
Navarrete and some of the other kids have dreams of playing college ball, and then college ball, and then going pro. 4th grader Waylon Parker's big brother just got a full-ride football scholarship to Washington State. Parker also started tackle when he was 6.
When you start hitting people, your head could be hurting like a lot.
And you've experienced that?
Yeah.
Even with the helmet on?
Mm-hmm.
Both kids say they've taken big hits. Navarrete says he had a concussion last year that hurt for a week. Those are a concern, but it's also the regular subconcussive knocks, ones that don't reach the level of overt symptoms that neurologists are worried about. Stella Lagarda is a practicing pediatric neurologist. When kids get hit on the head, or in her words, get their bell rung, she says they'll often brush it off.
They go back to play, and if they keep ringing their bell constantly, that's going to, over time, accumulate.
She says in the brain, nerve cells are taking that wear and tear and not having time to heal. In some people, it also begins a ripple effect, causing tau proteins in the brain to build up, form clumps, and interfere with brain functioning. This is a sign of CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. CTE has been found in the brains of hundreds of former NFL players, as well as those who've only played in amateur leagues. Lagarda says people might only see cognitive impairment and behavioral changes years later.
That's probably also the reason why parents think it's okay. These changes happen after the kids grow up and leave home.
In 2018, California Democratic Assembly member Kevin McCarty brought a bill forward to stop tackle football for kids below 12. It didn't get far. Last year, he reintroduced it. It was more measured this time, phasing tackle for kids under 12 out over the course of 4 years. In the past decade, participation in tackle has dropped, especially in wealthier and more liberal areas. At the same time, participation in flag football has grown, almost 40% for kids under 12 since 2015. Here's McCarty at a recent hearing for the bill.
I love my 49ers, and hopefully after 29 years, we'll come back and win a Super Bowl ring this year. So you can love football and love our kids and try to protect our kids at the same time.
But many of those kids and their parents came out to the state capitol in force to push back against the bill.
My name is Perry Sellers, and I play for the 12 Bridges Senior Band.
Tyler, and I oppose this bill.
Strongly oppose this bill.
The proposal passed out of that committee, but then, before the bill was even scheduled for a floor vote, California Governor Gavin Newsom stopped it in its tracks. He said he wanted to strengthen safety in youth football, but an outright ban wasn't the answer.
I'm not surprised at all.
Robin Swanson is a Democratic strategist.
Can you imagine what a political dumpster fire this would be? Not just for California, but for Democrats everywhere.
She says Newsom is a nationally recognized Democratic leader and a surrogate for President Biden. She says in an election year, he needs to be careful.
Every time we would talk about Republicans banning books, they would come back and talk about Democrats banning football.
Swanson says Newsom is politically astute and realizes football could be the next frontier in the culture wars.
It's just terrible timing on their part. I don't know that there's ever a good time to take on football in America, but I think this bill is a little too far ahead of its time.
Tackle football territory may be too risky for politicians, but it's still where kids are playing. For NPR News, I'm Kate Wolf in Sacramento, California.
And on the subject of sports injuries and children's health, new research takes a look at racial disparities in pediatrics. The findings include several examples of how differently children of color in the U.S. are treated by the medical community compared to white children. NPR's Maria Godoy reports.
The disparities in kids' health care exist whether you're looking at care for newborns or surgery for appendicitis or getting a diagnosis and treatment for developmental disabilities or ADHD. So says Dr. Nia Hurd-Gares, who oversaw the research.
No matter where you look, there are disparities in care for pretty much every racial ethnic group that's not white.
Hurd-Gares is a researcher at Northwestern University and a pediatrician at Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago.
She and her colleagues reviewed dozens of recent studies examining the quality of care children receive. She says there are lots of examples of inequalities across specialties, whether it's longer wait times to be seen or getting diagnostic imaging or getting basic pain management.
When a kid breaks a bone, when they have appendicitis, when they have a migraine, they should be treated for their pain.
But the findings showed kids of color were less likely to get treatment for their pain than their white peers. The researchers only looked at studies of children who had health insurance.
And so we cannot blame the lack of insurance of causing these disparities.
Researchers say the causes of these disparities are wide-ranging, but they're ultimately rooted in structural racism, including unequal access to healthy housing and economic opportunities, unconscious bias among healthcare providers, and disparate policing of kids of color. Dr. Monique Jindal is an assistant professor at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and one of the lead authors of the review. She says addressing these disparities may ultimately require sweeping policy changes.
Is really understanding how each of those sectors are intertwined within each other and how we cannot have quality or equitable healthcare without addressing each of the policy issues within the other sectors of society.
That could take a long time. In the meantime, Dr. Nia Hurd-Garris says healthcare providers should check their own biases.
Even if you are the most progressive provider, you're still going to have blinders, and making sure you're checking on those, challenging those, and even reviewing your own chart.
The findings appear in the journal The Lancet Child and Adolescent Health. Maria Godoy, NPR News.
And that's all things considered for this Sunday. Thanks so much for spending part of your evening with us, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Progressive Insurance, where drivers can compare direct rates using Progressive's rate comparison tool. Customers can see options and rates side by side. More at progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE. And from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, using research and evidence to develop solutions that help families and communities create a brighter future for young people. More information is available at aecf.org. This is NPR.
These winter mornings can make getting up and starting your day a challenge. Believe me, I know. This is Marianne Zalesnik, and despite the cold, I'm here starting at 5 a.m. so you get all the local, national, and international news, plus traffic and weather to start your day. It's Morning Edition on 91.7 WVXU.
A couple weeks back, my hometown did something I never thought would happen. People sang and celebrated as they watched a crane remove the last Confederate monument in Jacksonville, Florida. Living while black in Florida, the lows and the highs on the next Reveal.
Sunday nights at 9 and Friday evenings at 7 on 91.7 WVXU.
You're listening to 91.7 WVXU, connecting you to a world of ideas. I'm Tony Ray. Hope everyone has a great evening. Good night, everyone.
91.7 WVXU Cincinnati and 88.5 WMUP Oxford. News from Cincinnati Public Radio and NPR.
When you live through a movement, a cultural shift, you often don't know you're in the middle of something special until it's over. And what's left is the artifacts, The pictures, the music videos, a closet full of clothes you can't wear anywhere else. But a cultural earthquake is born out of something. It's a response to something. And in my backyard, there's been a boogeyman attached to our good times that for too long we refuse to talk about. Until now. Snap Judgment proudly presents an untold story. Hyphy kids got trauma. Snap Judgment, storytelling with the beat right after this short break, snappers. Stay tuned.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Herbst. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has dropped out of the Republican presidential campaign. NPR's Domenico Montanaro says this comes after questions about his campaign strategy after his distant second-place finish in Iowa.
DeSantis' campaign and the outside group supporting him spent $60 million over the past year on campaign ads to boost him. But since Iowa, despite DeSantis vowing to stay in the race, they spent nothing anywhere, and it looked like only a matter of time. DeSantis really had a failure to launch. He dropped in the polls before he even got in, amid withering attacks from former President Donald Trump. DeSantis never recovered. Today, he dropped out and endorsed Trump. It now really all does come down to New Hampshire between Trump and his former UN ambassador, Nikki Haley. Domenico Montanaro, NPR News, Washington.
Thousands of Israelis protested over the weekend against the government of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, calling for a new election as the war in Gaza drags on. NPR's Becky Sullivan has more from Tel Aviv.
For the first few months after war broke out between Israel and Hamas on October 7th, Israelis mostly stood together behind this government. Now, the voices calling for a change in leadership are starting to get louder. On Saturday night in Tel Aviv, one big protest crowd chanted "Resignation now." That included Guy Becker, an Israeli man evacuated from a kibbutz along the Lebanon border.
We need this government to be replaced as soon as possible, otherwise we'll never see the end of this conflict.
On Sunday, Netanyahu repeated his demand for full Israeli security control west of the Jordan River. In other words, his opposition to a future Palestinian state. Becky Sullivan, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
At least 27 people are dead, more than a dozen injured, after Ukraine shelled Donetsk, a Russian-occupied city in the eastern part of the country. This according to local authorities. The Russian-installed mayor of Donetsk says Ukraine's military fired shells at a market in a suburb of the city. Ukrainian officials haven't commented on the attack. Hundreds of thousands of people protested across Germany against right-wing extremism after hearing details of a plan concocted by a far-right political party to deport millions of migrants. NPR's Rob Schmitz has more.
Protests have been taking place in cities such as Hamburg, Frankfurt, Hanover, Dortmund, and Berlin, attracting hundreds of thousands. The protests were spurred by a report from a German news outlet that detailed how members of the right-wing Alternative for Deutschland Party, or AfD, met with German extremists in November to hatch a plan to deport immigrants and minorities, including those who are naturalized German citizens.
What a dickhead.
NPR's Rob Schmitz reporting from Berlin. You're listening to NPR News from Washington.
It's American feeding time. People driving stupid.
Billions of cicadas will emerge this spring across the eastern and southern states as two broods arrive simultaneously for the first time in more than 200 years. NPR's Claire Marie Schneider has more.
Come late April, more than 15 southern and eastern states can prepare for an eruption of cicadas from the warming spring soil. These insects will attract a mate with their deafening song, procreate, and then die, all within their short adult lifespan of only 4 to 6 weeks.
It's this big, sort of spectacular, macabre Mardi Gras. Lots of singing, lots of paramours pairing up, and then lots of dying.
That's Jonathan Larson, an extension entomologist at the University of Kentucky. Periodical cicadas spend most of their life underground before surfacing every 13 or 17 years. A brood constitutes multiple species of cicadas that emerge on the same cycle. The last time broods 13 and 19 emerged simultaneously was in 1803. Claire Marie Schneider, NPR News.
In Custer, South Dakota, hundreds of people carrying lit torches marched to a giant wooden beetle and set it on fire last night.
The goal of this annual event is to raise awareness of the destructive impact of the mountain pine beetle on forest land in the Black Hills. Firefighters lit the torches and then kept a close eye on the participants. The U.S. Forest Service calls the bug the most aggressive and destructive bark beetle in the western U.S. and Canada. There have been several outbreaks of the beetle in the Black Hills since the late 1800s. I'm Janine Herbst, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, for nearly a century, supporting efforts to promote a just, equitable, and sustainable society. More at mott.org. And the listeners who support this NPR station.
In another bad season for newspapering, the Baltimore Sun is sold again. After the last sale, though, the hedge fund owners kept the paper's staff mostly intact in order to go head-to-head with a new local rival.
There's ego involved here, right? I mean, I'm guessing.
So you're saying this was a bleep measuring contest?
Yeah.
On the next On the Media from WNYC.
Sunday evenings at 7 on 91.7 WVXU.
Support for Snap Judgment comes from Odoo. Odoo is an all-in-one management software built to enhance the efficiency of your entire business from anywhere in the world. More information at odoo.com/snap. That's ODOO.com/snap.
Support for Snap Judgment comes from Progressive Insurance. From car insurance quotes to buying, Progressive Insurance offers a variety of ways to stay protected. More at progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE.
Snap Studios. When I was a kid, visiting my cousins in Detroit, every evening, 6 o'clock, we'd run top speed to the TV to watch Detroit's own new dance show, featuring us, the neighbors up the street, the older cousins, people we know dancing. And one good turn on the dance floor can make you Detroit famous. I love every single thing about it, with the fierceness, this music, the slang, the fashion, and one dude always kills it.